Hey people, serious question. Do you think my last couple of video game reviews I've put out have been too negative? Like, I keep getting these free games from PlayStation Plus, and then I keep giving them bad reviews, but damn it, I keep giving them bad reviews because I have freaking standards, and these games feel like shovelware or like your typical studio sellout games where they just like made something because they had an IP. Like, I think if you're gonna spend $60 on a video game, it has to have some redeeming qualities. Like, anyway, how have I been doing this week? I replayed Sonic CD real fast, and I beat the game again in like under 2 hours, which kind of reminded me that when I came to first love video games, they were a lot shorter. Like, I don't want to spend like a month playing a video game only for it to completely like disappoint me. Then I also, speaking of that, started this month's free PlayStation Plus game, Suicide Squad Kills the Justice League, and I played it for like 2 hours, and while I was initially filled with nostalgic respect for Arkham Asylum and the Arkhamverse, I was like, oh, I remember Arkham City. It seems that this game just consists of like bouncing around the same badly defined Metropolis map, fighting 6 varieties of different boring-ass naked Brainiac zombies, so I don't know if I'm going to finish that. I wanted to at least finish the story mode, but the repetitiveness makes it really hard to play it for like over an hour without getting boring. Anyway, meanwhile, I also received a free copy of Trek to Yomi from PS Plus, and I'm surprised and pleased to say it's probably the most enjoyable video game experience I've had in a while. Yo everybody, Buster Green here, and today I'm going to talk about the forgotten 2002 beat-em-up classic Trek to Yomi, which I found to be a breath of fresh air in an era of overcomplicated and overly stupid cash-grabby video games. Before I get into that, there's 2 major public controversies about this game, so right off the bat, let's talk about them. Here they are. So the game came out in 2022, and by all accounts, a large number of people were like, fuck this game, it's a ripoff of Ghost of Tsushima. And yeah, that criticism is fair, because Tsushima did usher in this new era of samurai exploitation in video games, but I would say Yomi differentiates itself by dealing more with Japanese mythology and seemingly being more strongly based on samurai movies, whereas Tsushima was seemingly based on actual Japanese history and had the flavor of samurai movies. Its primary goal was to tell a historical story, but I might be speaking out my ass here, because truth be told, I haven't finished Tsushima yet, but I think Trek to Yomi all the same stands on its own as being a unique experience, and it holds its own for being a retro-style video game side-scroller up against Tsushima being an open-world game. But anyway, one thing I was definitely trying to figure out throughout Trek to Yomi was this game trying to do the same thing as Ghost of Tsushima, do a game based on history, or was it trying to more properly do a game based on old samurai movies, old Akira Kurosawa movies? Not really the history of Japan. And I definitely figured out through the course of playing the game that this game is definitely all about samurai movies, and it's not all about the real Japan. Which brings us then to the next biggest criticism of the game, that this game is just a product of cultural appropriation. Oh my god. So yes, is Trek to Yomi cultural appropriation? Well, that's a harder question to wrap my head around, because overall, I hate the idea of cultural appropriation. I think cultural appropriation is a stupid bullshit idea that haters made up to hold people back. Like, you know, I'm mostly against it because without cultural appropriation, you never get white Rastafarians, you never get Japanese hip-hop, you never get Elvis, or somehow Kali Mori being the reigning queen of Japanese hip-hop, despite being from Texas. But alright, here's my main issue with this game, cultural appropriation aside. Despite being a story about ancient Japan with an all-Japanese cast, this game is more Polish than a pierogi, because this game was made by a decently sized team of entirely Polish CG artists from Poland. Published by Devolver Digital. Devolver Digital is a company I actually have a pretty cool track record with, because they've always been good about releasing these small indie games and highlighting small indie games that are generally pretty awesome. But yeah, I guess I have a couple of gripes with this game. No game's completely perfect, but like I said, I think the only way this game could have been better if this game just had some sort of historical accuracy checker. That would have made it a lot better, because there's a handful of weird things in the early chapters of this game that strike me as factually incorrect. The most egregious of these being a repeated visual of the samurai flag from the Seven Samurai. Like, the thing about this flag is, I know for a fact this flag was made up for the movie Seven Samurai, because there's a pretty famous scene in the movie where the samurais make the flag themselves on the spot. And as far as I know, it wasn't based on anything real. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but seeing this prop from a movie being used over and over in this video game, it just felt random to me. It felt like if you made a video game about the old Civil War Wild West that acknowledged the Will Smith film Wild Wild West as historical events, and then there was a random giant spider because, you know, that's what you expect in the film Wild Wild West, except there were no giant steampunk giant spiders in real life. So yeah, giant steampunk spiders are super cool and all, but it would definitely be wrong, and it would definitely degrade anyone vying or claiming to have historical accuracy. And that's how I feel about the Seven Samurai flag being in this film movie about Japanese films. But anyway, like I said, the game doesn't actually seem to be trying to go for historical accuracy. It seems like it's trying to go for the vibe of an old Akira Kurosawa movie, and in that way it succeeds, but almost to a surreal level where certain areas resemble movie sets and they resemble miniatures on movie sets. So the game doesn't really look like I'm inside a realistic Japanese house. It looks like I'm on the film set of a samurai movie, and if I zoomed out the camera, if I spun the camera around, there would be a bunch of filmmakers eating donuts and living the life and whatever. I'm kind of impressed that it is so strongly based on the old samurai movies that even the bad guys in this game will do that old tokusatsu actor trope of waiting in a line to attack you. It's more noticeably ridiculous early on in the game, but you can get pincered and killed by a pair of enemies if they surround you. But otherwise, most of the enemies in this game will just queue up in a straight line to fight you, which is hilarious because I'm just like so used to seeing that in like Power Rangers. And it's such a hilarious, strange, and weird thing to like go out of your way to include in a video game. Like if I didn't know for a fact that they had to include that on purpose to imitate the weird fight scene seen in old samurai movies where a hero would just be like circled by a bunch of random enemies who would just dance around and being threatening because that looks good on camera. Yeah, anyway, that's what they did, and it's ridiculous. Later on, as the game gets more and more fantastic, the levels and the elements at play start to get more weird, and they start to look like miniature items from like old film sets. They start to look like bad special effects from old movies that were visually composited into the scene with like camera perspective tricks. And yeah, the crazy level of detailing recreating that is probably the main reason I respect the shit out of the game. I will say one thing, that they didn't capture the music of an old samurai movie. All those Akira Kurosawa movies usually had like bangers by Akira Ifukube, and like the music in this game kind of sucks. It's just like sparse. Like they definitely could have done a lot better with the music in this game, but yeah, aside from that, like the game is good and it feels so much like a movie that I want to call it a movie. But the number one reason to play this game is just that this game is like a master's class in video game cinematography. And video game cinematography is actually almost a lost art because people just don't do it anymore. Nowadays you have like free roam and like free cameras, but like back in the 90s, like when video games were like first going to 3D, there used to be a lot of video games that used fixed camera angles like this game to create a sense of cinematography and tension matching movies. I want to say probably the game that does this the best is like the original Silent Hill. But yeah, that idea has become rarer and rarer over the years. But yeah, Trek to Yomi really pushes that to its maximum and brings it back. And every segment and every stage is like this painstakingly beautiful camera shot that I can honestly take a lot of satisfaction playing through and interacting with that. But yeah, otherwise the game is mostly just your stand-up old school beat 'em up. I will borderline say it has some weak Metroidvania elements because every once in a while there'll be like a house that you can actually walk inside and find like a collectible or a stat item inside there. For the most part, every map in the game just comes to follow the light, go to the bright light. And yeah, that's a trope from like previous black and white games. Oh yeah, the game is also entirely in black and white. I think it was actually CG modeled in black and white, which is cool. Also, while the graphics look visually perfect when the camera is pulled back and with like some subtle motion blur, there are a handful of stages where the camera will get too close to the player and then suddenly the illusion is ruined and everything looks all fake. So the camera graphics are like almost perfect. There's just like a couple of instances where they fucked it up. In terms of control, the game does use this really unique gameplay system where you have a direction button, but long story short, if you press back, your character backs up instead of just like making a left turn or a right turn. There's actually a button to turn left and right. The system takes a little bit of getting used to at first, and it's really rough. It kind of sucks early in the game, but then as you progress through the game, you eventually get like the power to spin around quicker. You get like a turnaround slash, and I will say the controls really, really work out once you like level up to the place where they're like fully defined, and then they feel really good when they're like using a bow and arrow and for certain duel fights. Since the game is overall a beat 'em up, I will say I would have been super grateful if it had some basic multiplayer. I feel like this would be an awesome game to play through with a friend, but it doesn't. It's just a straightforward through story. Maybe since it's such a story game, there would be no point to have a multiplayer play, but I don't know. If they ever do a sequel to this, I would love it to have multiplayer. The game seems like it has 3 story paths based on what you determine your character's main motivation to be. It's either love, revenge, or something else. I think there's 3 story paths. There could be more if some of the story paths weave in and out of each other. All right, now I'm going to go over the story. Spoilers on from this point, but I'll try to wrap up the story quickly. So Trek to Yomi has like 6 in-game chapters, but I feel like only really 4 big things happen. So I'm just going to talk about those 4 big things because that's where I feel like the lines were drawn in the story. So I'm just laying this out the way I perceived it. At first, you're a child and you're like this child samurai in training. You have either a girlfriend or a fiance named Aiko. That's a really generic name. One day your village is attacked by a group of typical 7 samurai bandits who I believe kill your sensei, or maybe he dies later when you're an adult. I'm not actually sure when he dies. They really didn't clarify that. Anyway, somehow as a child, you find the leader of the bandits and you manage to cut his nose off, but not kill him. And that's a whole thing because it sets up this whole like revenge plot between the two of you. Then chapter 2, it flash forwards like 7 years and now you're a man. And several years later, the lead bandit comes back to kill you and literally slaughters everyone in your village. And I guess you try to stop him eventually, but he kills you too. Then chapter 3 is where the game fully goes off the rails and surprise, you're actually dead. The game does this in kind of a surprising way by starting you off into a town that appears to be full of like lepers or like people with a virus, but then the lepers turn out to eventually just be lame-ass cliche zombies. And then you fight through the zombies and then it turns out you're in hell and there's like demons and you're in like some kind of like weird mystical afterlife. You eventually walk through the afterlife and the game gets more surreal and more visually stunning and interesting as you go on. Anyway, then you find out that Aiko died somehow and your teacher died, and that's all super depressing. Now, you eventually get to like the end of heaven and the main character goes on a weird fetch quest to come back to life. And then somehow maybe he does come back to life, or maybe the entire part after he comes back to life was all a dream. Anyway, he goes off to kill the evil bandit samurai again, and that's the next section. Except in a surprise double fake out, I guess it wasn't a dream. The main character did die. And I guess the evil bandit samurai also died, and they were actually having their final battle in the afterlife. So that's kind of a big twist. That's the end of the game. The game doesn't have a ton of replayability because, I don't know, the story is pretty weak and the levels are beautiful, but they're pretty mundane and repetitive. It does have some different difficulties and different story paths you can play, but I feel like overall that doesn't mix things enough to make the game worth a replay. I would totally have replayed the game if they'd added multiplayer or just like an option to replay the game in color after you beat it in black and white, just to differentiate the second playthrough and show that there's like some new interesting things there. But yeah, this game was actually CG modeled in black and white, so I don't think it will ever be in color unless like someone releases like a full color mod. So yeah, that's overall Trek to Yomi. The story was kind of weak and twisty, but I still had a really good time playing with this, and it made me happy because it actually got me to reflect so highly and reverently about what I actually like about those old Akira Kurosawa movies I like so much. On top of that, I haven't actually seen those movies in decades, so it kind of reminded me of like all the things I'd forgotten about them from so long ago. There's also this other movie from the Kurosawa era that I've always wanted to check out. There's this movie Jigoku that is supposedly like a Japanese fanfic horror movie about like what hell is like. I've always heard it stands out pretty uniquely as just being a uniquely fucked up film about hell, and it's currently in the Criterion Collection because it became like rare and out of print for a while. So yeah, I might actually seek out Jigoku now. So that's all thanks to Trek to Yomi, which kind of reminded me of why I like classic samurai films and classic Japanese films in general. And yeah, it also reminded me of this long forgotten movie I wanted to check out. So yeah, if I had to talk to myself and another myself hadn't played this game, I would actually totally recommend myself to get this because it's actually a really decent game that kind of remind me of like why I like movies. Trek to Yomi currently retails for about $20 to $5, and I would say it's worth $10. If you're at all interested in cinematography, if you're at all interested in classic films, if you're at all interested in like old Japanese like art, You should definitely see this and play this because this is a modern beat 'em up game done right, and I think it's awesome. All right, that was Trek to Yomi. I fully recommend it. It's my first good video game review in months. Woo. All right, yeah, leave a comment and let me know what you guys think. Thanks. I'm out. Good night.